So good evening, everyone. The topic of this Learn and Share conference call is Strategies and Tools for Managing Cognitive Problems. I'm Russ Derry. I'm the Director of Education for Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, and I'll be moderating this call. So we're pleased to have as our speakers Dr. Michael Wolff, who's a neuropsychologist at Brains in Grand Rapids, and Amy Peterson, who will be sharing her perspective as both a person with epilepsy and a mother of a child with epilepsy. So welcome to both of you. We're really happy that you could join us this evening. Dr. Wolff, can you start by just describing briefly your experience with this topic, and then Amy, you can follow up.
Sure. Well, Amy and I both had the pleasure, not overstepping here, Amy, but had the pleasure of speaking together at the epilepsy conference not too terribly long ago, and the subject was very well received in terms of understanding both from a personal and professional level in terms of what we're looking at to try to provide help for cognitive losses following epilepsy or, still en route to unmanaged epilepsy in any way. And so that's how this presentation had come up with the Epilepsy Association of Michigan. And then, just personal experience working as a neuropsychologist and having quite a few individuals that I have the opportunity to work with having different types of epilepsy also has helped me to develop some knowledge in the skill area to share tonight, and obviously to hear some other ideas and to listen in as well.
Great. Amy?
We had a lot of fun, didn't we, at that conference?
Yep.
That was great. I learned a lot. My name's Amy Peterson, and I have epilepsy. I was diagnosed at age 13. My son, Carter, was diagnosed at 18 months old. I'm a mother of 4, and he's my only one with epilepsy. He is now 11. So we are actively working with his school, especially this past year. We've been working with the school a lot about things to put in place to get around him to do better in school, and a lot of his struggles are this topic exactly. So we've tried all the things that didn't work, and now we're on to the things that do work, and so we're starting to see a change, and hopeful that we can share some information that we've gotten along the way.
Great. Okay, so epilepsy and its treatment can affect a wide range of cognitive functions, including attention, executive function, and executive function includes things like planning, decision-making, reasoning, kind of the higher order thinking. It can affect processing speed, and of course it can affect memory. That's the one that most people are familiar with when they think about cognitive problems associated with epilepsy. In most cases, multiple factors contribute to these difficulties, including medication side effects, the underlying brain condition that's causing the epilepsy, the after effects of seizures, anxiety and depression, and long-term changes in the brain resulting from epilepsy and seizures. So can you talk about the importance of neuropsychological evaluation in helping people to sort through all these different possibilities and to understand and address their cognitive difficulties?
Sure. So a neuropsychologist's role is to have a solid foundation in terms of understanding the medical considerations going into the evaluation. And as we know, epilepsy is very dynamic, and there's different types from, simple all the way up to the generalized events, and everything between that can affect focal areas of the brain, or can be very robust and affect the whole brain parenchyma and functioning therein. And so the neuropsychologist tries to take that information that we have from the EEGs and medical professionals and possibly other neuroimaging studies, MRIs and CTs, to understand the neuropathology. And then we try to build a model of how your brain is functioning. And that's important because even though, an individual can have a similar type of epilepsy, let's say medial temporal lobe epilepsy, which is fairly common, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to react the same depending on the age that they're diagnosed. because our brains can compensate for different areas of vulnerability. So let's say that temporal lobe in your child is influenced by epilepsy. It's possible that other centers of the brain will take over and mediate some of the functioning for that area of vulnerability, but then you'll lose a skill set in a different area. And that's what we try to understand, is how is the brain compensating and working in consideration of what we know medically, and then we can start to target more specifically areas to intervene. Because in some cases, we'll test different types of memory. As a good example, there's working memory, which is 15 seconds or less, typically speaking. It's that very immediate ability to learn and pay attention. And then there's different types of verbal learning, from rote verbal learning, which is facts, to complex declarative, which is stories, and different types of visual memory as well. So we'll run profiles not just in memory, but in attention and executive abilities and language and visual spatial skills and awareness and adaptive sets to try to understand where are the strengths and weaknesses to then help families or an individual, if they're an adolescent or adult working on these skill sets themselves, to know where they're likely to have the best success with intervention and where you might be spinning your wheels if you use a strategy because it doesn't fit with how the brain seems to be working.
Great. And Amy, have you had experience with neuropsychological evaluation?
Yeah, so this is what's really cool about our story with Carter especially. He just finished 5th grade this past year, and we did not meet with the neuropsych or get an exam until he was in 4th grade. And I feel like I'm kind of kicking myself for not doing that sooner, because that really changed the game for us. Before, we were kind of grasping at straws. Okay, what's related to the epilepsy? What's related to the medicines? Could he have ADHD? It's another thing that it's still in the mix, and we're trying to figure it out. But when we took Carter, and he already had an IEP in place, and we have a school that's very supportive and wanted to do the right things for Carter, but just didn't know how to get around him the best way possible. So after that neuropsych evaluation was delivered, I think it was 28 pages, and there was at least 10 pages that were dedicated to resources and things that we should try that will work with Carter, because they knew exactly what was going on. So we gave that to the school, and they put everything they could in place immediately. And he went from 1 grade level of reading, and he skipped like 3 levels because of what that neuropsych told us. So it was very encouraging. And even though it wasn't necessarily fully covered by insurance, we have pretty good insurance, but that to us, I would have paid whatever to have that information so that the teachers and everyone who sees Carter on a daily basis can know exactly what kind of support he needs.
Right, great. So the report that results from a neuropsychological evaluation can include varying degrees of recommendations on how to cope with memory and thinking problems on a daily basis. Some will focus more on what's not working and what the strengths and weaknesses are, but may not include a lot in terms of actual strategies. Others, like Amy, like you suggested, have a lot of suggestions and strategies and resources listed. But in any case, the person who's going to be doing that day-to-day work is the person with epilepsy and then their family members. Those are the ones who are going to be implementing those strategies or coming up with strategies. So what other types of professionals, besides neuropsychologists, can help with the day-to-day management of cognitive problems? Things like suggesting strategies or helping people to try them out or adapting these strategies. What are the range of different professionals who can help with that?
Amy, do you want to jump in first, and I'll fill in after you?
Well, I feel like you might know more about this, but I will tell you some resources that have helped Carter and I even can range to the retired teacher down the street who actually meets with Carter to read with him, because reading is such a big deal for him, and he's getting better. things like that have really helped us. I have an occupational therapist friend that is on speed dial. She has such a great understanding and has really, really been a great resource for us with a ton of questions. She knows IEPs front and back, which has been a huge thing for us. He works with a speech therapist as well, and I know that they really focus on, okay, you can't get that word, but how can we get there some other way? And so that's been really helpful for Carter. And I have to say, though, too, that I was really encouraged to hear you say that as you get older, your brain learns how to compensate, because in certain ways I do feel, and I'm almost 40, I'll be 40 this September, and I feel like my brain does do that. I run a small business and I'm able to compensate for where my weaknesses are. That, or just, you know, tell everybody that that is my weakness and I may forget stuff, you know. Sometimes I flake out, and sometimes, you know, if I don't write it down, it doesn't happen. But that was really great to hear that we as people with epilepsy, we don't have to accept that this is what our truth is going to be forever, that we can work on it.
Right, right. And
yeah, I completely agree with that.
Go ahead.
So my three favorite specialists, you already mentioned one of them, Amy. Occupational therapists are absolutely fantastic. Their job is to take skill sets and make it functional in the world at any age level, so from children all the way through geriatrics, to help them make meaningful gains, whether it's writing or doing laundry or meal planning, or how to use different calendar systems, how to develop fine and gross motor skill sets, OT particularly for fine motor. My other favorites are physical therapy and physical therapy and speech therapy. Speech therapy, typically, like their name implies, we're going to be working throughout the life cycle with language, communication, talking clearly, reducing stuttering, trying to manage dysarthria, swallowing influences that can come into play, learning social language, because as we know, language is complex. And a lot of my individuals who struggle with epilepsy at various points in their life struggle to understand social humor and content, and so they're always taking things a little bit on the literal edge. And so they can help to develop those skills, but more importantly, speech paths are notorious for knowing tremendous memory skills and memory interventions that they can help very directly with. And then physical therapy, some of that vestibular and balance and muscle strength and coordination and maintaining the ability to function in the world as best as you can to mitigate any risk for orthopedic injury or falls or different things like that. So those three are fantastic. Now, some individuals out there will have opportunities to work with what's called a recreational therapist. Those are individuals that allow anywhere throughout the life cycle, again, opportunities to connect with community activities. So whether it's going to the mall or bringing people together to go bowling or to watch movies, these individuals are trying to help improve life quality by increasing access to the community and activities they're in. And those are great people too. Some people at gyms will have access, and I think it's very important, to weight trainers and physical health experts to make sure that you're not overlifting and make sure you're managing your cardio effectively and not putting yourself at more risk or danger of being injured while you're in the gym. And lots of gyms will now have someone available for free if you have a gym membership, but make sure to connect with those people. And then there are the dietitians out there. As we know, medications used in the management of epilepsy can sometimes suppress diet, and sometimes they can embellish diet. And getting a dietitian involved to try to help manage that so we don't end up with obesity or any other health risks as a result of not getting appropriate nutrient intake are some of my favorites for the treatment side. And then, of course, you have your neurologist and possible neurosurgeon who are managing either medications or the progression of the epilepsy from a medical point of view. And then the neurosurgeon, if they do have to look at any neurosurgical implantation or other type of ablation or lobectomy to help manage that. So there's a lot of people who can come into your guys' lives.
Right, great. For children, I know that a lot of this type of assistance can be provided and paid for by the school system, particularly if you have an IEP. But how can people obtain this type of assistance in the home where it's often most needed? And are there limitations in terms of insurance coverage, in terms of when, where, and for how long someone can receive such services?
So the thing that we have to be mindful of is there's this artificial wall that comes up, in my opinion, and it's arbitrary often. And this will happen for children and adults alike, but children, since we're talking about the schools here. If it's deemed by the insurance company as a developmental disability or something that has always been in the child's life, typically speaking, an insurance company will not cover that, and they'll deem the responsibility for service and intervention to the school because they will not authorize coverage or payment for services. Whereas if the epilepsy had onset at a specified point and we can document that the changes that have happened in your child are the result of what's going on with the epilepsy, then the insurance company will say that's now an acquired pathology or an acquired disorder, and from that point forward, out until, not indefinitely, but out until they deem a person has either reached their maximum potential or gain, or until the epilepsy is stable and their developmental progression is back on track with the cohort that they're in, then they will stop coverage. So the trick is trying to figure out pre-morbidly, or what happened prior to the epilepsy, how is the child functioning prior to the epilepsy, and did that epilepsy contribute to any change in functional status? And if that's the case, then that's an acquired pathology or an acquired problem. If it's the other, where they had developmental delays anyhow, and the epilepsy onset did not make that worse, then they'll try to fire that back to the school. Now, the problem for a lot of families that we work with is that the schools will then make their own determination and say, well, we're not here to treat your whole child, or, later on adults in college and stuff like that, as an individual to function in the world. Our job is to provide you the necessary skill sets that you need to function in the academic environment. So if you have a basic skill set in motor and speech, you might not qualify for additional services, even though it has been deemed a developmental disability. And so it gets kind of complicated when we get schools and insurance companies and health agencies kind of all caught up in the mix, and they all have their little boundaries, and the family has to be very diligent and focused to try to make sure that they continually advocate for their loved one.
And what about...
That's a huge point that you just made, and I want to piggyback on that real quick, because I'm going to first of all say that I love teachers. Teachers do the hard stuff. They take our kids every day. They love on them. They want the best for them. But there have been times where I've had to dig in my heels and say, oh no, this is what we need, and we're going to figure out how to do it, and we're going to work together until we get it figured out. They will not say things like, this kind of goes with what you said, is that, I have a feeling that my son's going to be diagnosed with ADHD, and they won't touch that with a 10-foot pole, because as soon as they say that, then they have to accommodate for that. And schools don't have money to do that, so they'll ask, okay, we want to hear from your pediatrician. Well, my pediatrician sees my son about 3 times a year when he's sick. So I'd much rather hear this from the person who's sitting with my kid all day, every day, and probably sees way better, ADHD things that might come up throughout the day. But unfortunately, that can get passed back and forth if you're not very on top of it, I guess.
Right. Dr. Wolff, does community mental health, if you're speaking of children with developmental disabilities, does that ever, the community mental health system ever help with that? And also, what about children's special health care services? Are those both potential resources as well for funding some of these services?
Yes, so there's a yes and a no to those both. So community mental health, most of our community mental health do not have OT, PT, speech, neuropsychology, recreational therapy, or anything like that as part of their systems. They typically have case managers who can help to coordinate a lot of the care and needs that are there to try to make sure that things don't fall through the gaps. Or they usually will have psychiatry and counseling services available. That said, most of our community mental health agencies can develop contracts with hospitals or agencies, even like Brains, to say, hey, we have these dollars, this child, can't find services through the school and the insurance isn't willing to pay for them. If you have Medicare or an insurance that's denying services and support, yes, they can create a contract payer agreement with an agency. Those are fairly uncommon, I would say, but they're certainly a viable option to consider. Now, the Children's Special Health Care Fund typically will not cover the types of services that we've discussed. Typically, they will require durable medical equipment, walkers, ventilators, and other medical equipment or medical need types of resources, but they don't typically cover therapy from what I understand from Chris Buchek. So she's our ombudsman in this region for the Children's Special Health Care Fund, but they will cover things like hospitalizations or, if you're dysphagic, they might be able to help with swallowing studies or treatment or feeding therapies. If you have some sort of break, sprain, covering the AFOs and equipment, and then acute medical care after that, physical therapy for a while, may well be considered by the Children's Special Health Care Fund. But ongoing care that an individual might need can be very tricky to secure either through a CMH or a Children's Special Health Care Fund in those areas.
Right. So it sounds like navigating that whole system of potential funding sources can be a challenge.
Yes.
In many cases, cognitive function can be improved through medical interventions, such as getting better seizure control or changing medication to reduce cognitive side effects. But what I'd like to focus on for the rest of the call are day-to-day behavioral and technological strategies to either improve cognitive function or compensate for cognitive deficits. So let's start by talking about memory. And as I mentioned, this is probably the most common cognitive complaint among people with epilepsy. What are the most common types of memory problems experienced among people with epilepsy, and what have you found to be some of the most effective strategies and technologies for dealing with these memory problems?
So I was going to jump in ahead of you on this one, Amy. When we're looking at memory, the most common memory deficit that I see in most of my individuals who have epilepsy is what's called rote verbal learning problems. And that's the inability to remember facts of the day or people's names or the grocery list. They're details that seem to be disconnected from lots of other life events that your brain needs to remember. And unfortunately, those details are commonly lost. That can happen both visually, which is if you put your keys in the wrong or different place each time, that's a detail that your brain can't easily remember. Or if you're driving down the road and you all of a sudden take a wrong turn, now you're stuck in detail memory going, oh boy, I don't remember anything and I don't know if I've seen that before, and now the details seem to become very confusing very fast. And so those rote learning principles are probably the most commonly influenced. Now, some individuals will have, depending on the location and extent of the epilepsy, some individuals might have just pure visual memory loss. Some might have almost complete verbal memory loss. Some will forget events that have happened in their day, and that's called an episodic memory, where it's just something that happened, and they won't remember it 15 minutes later, an hour later. So your individual gets in the car and you say, how did day go? And they look at you like, well, it was fine, and they don't have details to share with you about their day. And in kids, we see that more. In adults, it's less common that they just won't know how to share that. And so if adults have that, it's obviously very troublesome. So those are some of we test other types of memory, but those are some of the bigger ones that we have. that we find are most common and problematic. Now, trying to help with that, so we usually ask individuals, if they don't have a problem with contextual learning, to add context. So instead of thinking you got to go to the grocery store and get eggs and milk and bacon, because everyone loves bacon, so every time you go to the store, we shall get bacon. That's not true, but I like bacon. But instead of thinking about as random details, the goal is to think about meals. So tonight for supper, we're going to have hamburgers and baked beans, and then afterwards I want to make a pan of brownies. Well, now your mind's thinking about the context of what this is going to be, and now it's easier to remember, well, okay, well, if we're going to have hamburgers, we probably need buns and hamburger. And if we're going to have baked beans, I should grab a can of baked beans. And, you know, if we're going to have brownies, well, brownies require milk and egg and, you know, some sort of chocolate mix probably if you're not making them from scratch. And so that context now helps you to recall it. Or if you're thinking about your day, you know, you might be thinking about, oh, today's the day I get to go outside and I get to go to my doctor's office, and after my doctor's we usually go out to eat. And so you think about in the context of it, then you start to go, oh, shoot, okay, well, what time is that doctor's appointment? And then you start to fill in the details after you start to add context, which is a very brief review, but I don't want to over-talk here. Before letting Amy jump in and talk about some of her personal stuff, and I can certainly add in a ton more to this area, but one of our best strategies that we find is context to make it easier.
Okay, great. Amy,
what
are your experiences in terms of what types of memory you've struggled with or that Carter has struggled with, and then what has been helpful for you?
So I can speak more on this personally than I can relate it to Carter, because he's 11 and we're still kind of starting to see things like that. But for me, I've been living with it for so long that I really have had to put things in place to help my day go smoother, because it's a little terrifying that I'm the mom and I'm the one who's in charge of our schedule, and half the time I don't even know what happened earlier today, just like you mentioned. Someone will say, how was your day? And I go, well, it was great. And I can't remember any details about it, but I remember every single word to that 90s song back in the day. I don't know how that happened. So for me, and as our family gets more busy every year, I found that we have a shared calendar. It's called Cozy, C-O-Z-I, and it's been a lifesaver for me because I know that I always have it with me. It's an app on my phone, and as soon as someone says, hey, can you do a photo shoot next Friday, then I can pull out my phone, because I don't remember what next Friday is. I only can do one day at a time. And if it's free, then I can put it right in there. Okay, yep, I've got you down on Friday. And every day before I go to bed, I check my calendar for the next day. Okay, what's the next thing? So, I have to be up at 7 tomorrow because I have this appointment. And that, to me, I don't make any plans without looking at it. And if it's not on there, it doesn't happen, which, you know, that's happened too before. If I didn't enter it right when I was thinking about it, then things can get forgotten, but happens less and less. I also found that it really helps to do things right when you're thinking of it. That may be a little bit of my ADD coming into play, but sometimes I'll say, I got to take stuff to Goodwill and donate it. I should probably do that. And then I'm like, well, I'm not doing anything right now, so I'm just going to go do it, because otherwise it could sit in my trunk for the next 3 months. And it's interesting that you said it's hard for people to remember names and things like that, because I've always said that it's very difficult for me. And a lot of adults say that, actually, that it's hard to remember names. They're just not a name person. In fact, my husband will look at me and say, that's not an epilepsy thing. That's just, something that everyone deals with. But I think mine's to a little different degree. So sticky notes are my friend, GPS, like you said, the turn by turn, I need to see, okay, what's the next turn? My husband needs to look at a map and see the whole thing start to finish so he can see how he's getting there. That overwhelms me. I have to see one turn at a time. So that's kind of how I navigate. I will also say I struggle with finding the right words. So if I'm going for a word and it just isn't coming, I will use Google. I will use a thesaurus because I know what I'm trying to say. And if you saw some of the stuff that I've had to look up, you probably would laugh. But it's just something that, we live in an age that has a lot of technology at our fingertips, and that's helped me a lot.
Great. And Dr. Wolff, besides smartphones and calendar apps and that type of thing, are there any other technologies that you've found to be particularly helpful for memory?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've talked about for years with the Epilepsy Foundation is something called the Livescribe Pen, Livescribe. I really like that. It's a pen that you can record when people are talking, while you're also taking notes. And then if you get overwhelmed with the notes, or if you go back and read your notes later and you can't remember something, you can go back and click that area as long as you're using this EchoSmart pad that they have, and touch that area of the notepad, and it'll play the recording for you at the time that you're writing that note, so you can listen to the material again. It also can now dock to computers, and as long as the person was talking clearly, it can transcribe that information as best as it can for you, or type it out, so that you can then read it. Obviously, you can listen to it again later if you want. Or even when, I have individuals that I recommend it to, especially my college students or adults who like to read or be part of book clubs, you can just be reading a book, and all you have to do all of a sudden is turn on the record button and say, ooh, this is an important idea. Record yourself, so it's like a mini recorder, and then just keep going through your book, and later on, you can, again, plug that back into the docking station, and it'll transcribe what you said. So now you have your cliff notes, whether it's because you're going to be engaged in a class discussion or in the book club that you want to talk about it, or, individuals who go to church who know ahead of time what chapters they might be reading. So I really like that, the Livescribe pen option. I usually now encourage families, whether you have a smartphone or just a mini recorder, to bring that around with you so that as things come to your mind throughout the day, our mind is a thinking machine, and it just always is throwing different things out there. But that way, instead of having to stop or write it down somewhere, especially if you were out on the road and don't have access to a pen or a pencil and notepad, you can just pull it out of your purse, or, if it's a small one, out of your pocket, and just record yourself with quick little memos and to-dos that you can then bring into an organizational system at a later point in time. Can be very useful. Sometimes individuals also, when you might be going into important things, whether it's a class or a meeting or talking to someone important, sometimes doing priming things like listening to some songs that put your mind in a positive mind state. Or for me, when I studied for grad school, I was always listening to Alabama. And so by the time I got done studying for my national boards, a song of Alabama would come on the radio, and I'd remember what I was studying around the time that I heard that song each time. So we can do memory priming things too, via music, via location, study where you're going to study at, who's going to be around you when you're studying. All those types of things help our brain to get into the zones for what we want it to do, whether it's conversation or memory, or this is where I really need to pay attention. And so don't overlook that. And that's not a technology one, but it could come into very important play for you.
Right.
And then, the best thing, whether you're using technology or old school learning approaches, which old school still works great, is routine. Keep doing it the same way. Don't try to always reinvent a new strategy each day or each week. Find something that kind of works for you, even if it doesn't work perfectly. But if you don't mind using it, stick with it and become an expert in that way of using it. And I think that's what Amy is doing with the Cozy app that she talked about, and there's several others out there. But don't abandon it just because it didn't work 1 or 2 days. It takes practice to make perfect, and so find something that's like, hey, this isn't so bad, and keep using it until it becomes second nature.
Great. So I know a lot of, if you just look at any kind of site for website or anything on memory problems, one of the most common things that is mentioned is mnemonic devices, and it seems like those are only useful in kind of a limited set of circumstances. Can you talk about those and then any other kind of internal memory aids?
Yeah, so mnemonics are more common when you're studying to memorize material. And lots of times mnemonics works well for, again, college or academics or, something big coming up. But it's really hard to use mnemonics successfully. That's where you come up with a word like homes for the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior, to try to recall the material. But if each day you're having to come up with new mnemonics for different types of events that are coming up, now you're spending just as much time trying to figure out what words am I going to go into that versus just maybe rehearsing it more times over or making yourself flashcards or jotting down that list or recording it for yourself or, bringing that into a family event planner with, your immediate family or a guardian or someone like that. So mnemonics can be very useful when you have time and preparation over days and weeks, but it's hard to do, I should say harder to do within the same day. Right. Does that make sense, Russ?
Yeah, and I totally have something to throw in there, too. I told this story at the last time we discussed this. I told the story about my mom who actually teaches study skills and time management at a college level. And I think before I was even diagnosed, I was not a very good student. They probably didn't know. I mean, we didn't know that I had epilepsy, but she worked with me to get some study skills under my belt that would help me remember for tests especially. And she brought up mind mapping, and that was a game changer for me because I was a solid C student. And I'm pretty sure she still has my test that the first time I tried mind mapping, I think I got an A-, and she was just so proud. She still shows her students to this day. And that for me, because I'm such a visual person, and then also the muscle of writing down, basically, can you explain what mind mapping is? I'm not as good at it as you are. Do you guys remember how that goes?
Dr. Wolff, are you familiar
with that? Is this where you were talking about jotting down a bunch of ideas and then bringing them together later?
So you start in the middle with a main idea. Say you're studying the Civil War. So you put Civil War in the middle of your paper and then you circle it. And then you do a spike out to the right and then you something,
yep.
So that to me was something that I could recall when it was time to take the test, because that's where I struggled. It was the memory part that I was struggling with. And so each idea then had its own spike or 2 or 3 off of that. And my mind map got so big that I had to tape on other pieces of paper to it, but that only made it more exciting and funny for me because there's, tape all over and it's not even. And but for me, that was a huge help, and I think that's a really old school idea.
Right. I've heard of that before.
Yeah, but it's a great idea. That's schema mapping.
Great.
Oh, is that what it's called?
That's what I call it, but yep.
Excellent. All right, well, let's talk about a different type of cognitive problem. A lot of times what people describe as memory problems may actually be more related to attention. For example, we mentioned the losing your keys example earlier. If you set your keys down and later can't find them, it may seem like you forgot where you put those keys when, in fact, you never actually noticed where you put them down in the first place. So that in that instance, if you just idly set them down without paying attention where you set them down, that could be actually more of an attention problem. So can you talk about attention difficulties in general, and then specifically about ADHD as it relates to epilepsy, and some of the most effective strategies for coping with them?
Amy, I'm going to let you jump on this one first.
Okay.
You've done a lot of these things.
So let's talk about those keys for a second, because I think everyone could tell you that they have a hard time remembering where they left their keys. I mean, they make those tile, I think it's called tile, for you to put on your keychain so that you can buzz it whenever you can't find them, because it seems to be something across the board. But, you know, I do have a home base for that. The rest of my house is complete chaos, but I know where my keys are, because that's really important. That's that one thing that I do when I get in the house. You walk in the door, you hang up the keys right away, because I've learned too many times that I will be late for something, because not only I could move them, but there's, you know, 5 other people in my house that could have played with them if I didn't put them away. So I also use those keys. Say I'm at a friend's house and I know that I have something in the refrigerator that I want to take with me. It's my leftovers and they're really good, and I don't have to cook tomorrow if I bring it home with me. But I put those keys in the refrigerator with my food that I want to remember. So when it's time for me to leave and I'm looking for my keys, I go, oh yeah, they're in the fridge, and that helps me remember to grab that on my way out. So things like that have really helped me. I really can't preach on this very much, because I'm really bad at this stuff. My kids will tell you, you know, there's times where I'm very forgetful, and it definitely affects our day-to-day. But even my kids know now, hey, Mom, remember I'm having a friend over after school. So, you know, and they know, the people around you, we've talked about this a little bit, it's just so important to have people around you, too, that understand how you tick and what you need. So.
Great. And
Yep.
it just reminds me of this morning I put my, seems odd, but I set a box of tea on my shoes because I knew I need shoes to get to work. I want that tea, so I'm going to put it on my shoes.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It's silly, but it works. So.
Yep. So when it comes to ADHD, we need to remember that there's hundreds of things that are going to cause an attention problem. Epilepsy is one of them, and that doesn't mean you have ADHD, but it does mean that you probably have an attention problem. Because every time we see a blip in the radar with any type of abnormal electrical current in the brain, which also then correlates to abnormal chemical current simultaneously, it's like taking a chalkboard and randomly rubbing an eraser all around through whatever is written up there. So some stuff's going to get left, some stuff's not going to get left, or it's going to seem like it's hit and miss. So it's like, why can I remember that, but I can't remember this? Or why did I pull that one out of the hat, but I can't pull this one out of the hat? So it seems a lot of times it's kind of crazy-making because you have these blips of brilliance and then these other ones that make you feel really sheepish. And so we will see that happening quite a bit in epilepsy. Even if the epilepsy is fairly well managed, we'll still see those blips in the radar. In some cases, psychostimulant medications can be used now. It used to be that we were worried that psychostimulant medication could increase the propensity of having additional seizure activity. The current research suggests that that's not necessarily true. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but it suggests that the risks are no less high using a medication more commonly used for ADHD or not in most cases. So for some of you whose doctors have been a little bit reluctant, talk to them again and see what they think for your type of epilepsy, the other types of medications that you are on in your medical factors. That might be a very efficient way to try to consider helping with your attention. Routine, again, comes right back into this. The more you keep your keys in the same spot and you keep your tea on your shoe in the same spot, the more likely you're going to follow through with that. Again, routine, and practice are great, but they're also boring and they're frustrating. I like going back to technology on a smartphone, tablet, or iPad or anything like that. To-do lists. Most of them now, even a Gmail calendar, an Outlook calendar, when you put stuff on there, you can add reminders to those. So once you put it in there, even if you're having an attention problem and or memory problem, because the two are going to look somewhat similar, if you put a task pop-up reminder on there, you'll all of a sudden hear a little bell or a whistle go off, and they'll say, hey, you need to go do this. Depending on how severe the concern might be for you, you might want to turn those volumes up really loud, as long as your environment so that's not going to be unusually disruptive. Otherwise, even if you forget it for a moment, the next time you go back around, to double-check that computer or that phone. It'll be sitting on there for you. Hey, you got a to-do coming up. So give yourself a couple hours in advance reminding, and then so don't just set one alarm. Say, hey, remind me in 2 hours, remind me again in an hour, remind me again in a half an hour, remind me again in 15 minutes. So each time it's popping up, you have to hit, okay, postpone, but it's going to pop up again. Don't just do it once and then all of a sudden sit back down. You're probably going to forget it, and then it's out of sight, out of mind, which isn't going to be so helpful for you. It's great to have a good family system around you and a good physician system around you, too. They can do call reminders, but even if, the call reminder is 2 days ahead, you still might forget. So they can, again, add you to a 2-day call reminder, a 1-day call reminder, and maybe they'll put a pop-up memo in their system and say, hey, call you the day of, too, or call your guardian the day of to make sure that they know we need to get you here because we need to see what's going on and help you understand those types of things. So to-do lists and those pop-ups on technology are great. For those of us who are old school, the old pencil paper ones are still very viable as long as you keep those with you. And you're used to having that on or around your person quite often. But I think, Amy, you alluded to this. There's lots of cool little stickers out there now that are GPS tracking stickers. So if you are a person who's commonly, because of attentional deficits, forgetting, misplacing, or losing something, you can put these something of importance, obviously, keys to the house, where certain technology is, where you're storing certain things. You can put a GPS tag on it, and that'll link to a computer or a smartphone so that they can tell you, hey, you put it here, or they'll walk you within about 5 to 10 feet of it, and then you at least know, hey, I'm within 5 to 10 feet of what I'm looking for. Then you start digging, and hopefully most of us are keeping our places really clean and organized, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, because a lot of my individuals with epilepsy are not very good at that, but that is so important. The more you keep your environment organized and labeled, and I know that sounds cheesy, but almost all my individuals that have epilepsy, particularly unmanaged, I tell them, make your place look like it has a little bit of an Alzheimer's person in there. Label your silverware drawer and where you want the knives, spoons, and forks, so you don't constantly keep changing up your silverware drawer. That can drive some people crazy. Just label where you want different things in your dresser. Label your bookshelves. It will help to provide peace of mind, and the more we de-stress, the better your attention will be and the better your memory will be.
Right.
So that was super interesting to hear. That say that again, the part about people with epilepsy struggle with being organized. Is that right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Well, that actually ties right into our next question, which is related to executive function, which is very closely related to attention. Executive function has a number of processes that fall under that broad category. Can you talk, Dr. Wolff, about some of those things, including organization, that fall under executive function?
Sure. So executive function, I always tell individuals to imagine that this is like the executor of a business. It's a part of the brain that gets a lot of the information channeled to it, and then that executor has to then make decisions in terms of what am I going to do with it. So it's involved in decision-making and planning and organizing, learning from mistakes, being able to judge, was that a good idea or a bad idea so that I do it again, knowing how to tweak it to make it a little bit better, knowing to make decisions in terms of budgets and finances and priorities. In a lot of my individuals, unfortunately, with epilepsy, their priorities are different from what other people in their families might see them being, because sometimes they have a tough time thinking far enough out ahead to know how to appropriately plan for those activities. The ability to use a budget effectively, and then, of course, just managing daily tasks. Those are all some of the more common things that we think of with executive functioning. But we also need to realize that executive functioning is also the brain's ability to know, am I overreacting? Am I coming on too strong? Or if someone offends you, to know, hey, I should say something about that. That was offensive and that was mean. And, I need to stand up for myself in an appropriate way. So it's that self-monitoring and that judgment that comes into relationship and knowing what to do. And it also helps to prioritize what should I or should I not remember from this day. So the executor is just like the executive, the high-level CEO of a company. They manage all that, so all the other processes in the company, or in this case the brain, are working as effectively as they can to navigate their day.
And does working memory fall under executive function as well? That that ability to juggle multiple ideas and thoughts and pieces of information at once?
It does, yep.
Okay, great. So because our time is limited, let's focus on one concrete example that involves multiple executive functions. And we kind of mentioned this earlier. We're going to think about cleaning a room. So that involves initiation, so getting started, making that decision to get started on something. Involves time management, planning, persistence, self-monitoring, working memory, and a number of other executive functions. So can you talk about how people can overcome deficiencies in these skills to accomplish the task of cleaning a messy room?
A lot of prayer and patience.
Yep, that's how it is around these parts.
So for this one, I always tell families, when you mention it for adults and children, even if you don't have epilepsy, if you're male, in my opinion, but when you say go clean a room, that sounds so easy, and we all know what that means. It's like, well, duh, I just got to go clean that up. But cleaning a room has multiple steps. It's straightening things on the bookshelf. It might be folding blankets. It might be straightening the furniture. It might be dusting the TV. It might be vacuuming or sweeping and, doing something with the floor in terms of mopping the floor. It might be a bedroom where toys have to go in different places. And so each room has its own dynamic, and we think, well, it's just cleaning the room, do what you got to do. But I always tell individuals that we should usually, when we go about cleaning a room, break cleaning in a room into a minimum of 2 different sequences. The first sequence might be, hey, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to get everything off the floor, and I'm going to straighten up anything that's really obviously laying out that shouldn't be laying out. Then I'm going to take a break, a short break, especially for guys, because otherwise we're never coming back. But then take a break and go, okay, so now what's left? Well, what's left is either the vacuuming, the dusting, the putting things in particular spots, or bringing stuff to laundry. And then, obviously, if you have to bring something to the laundry, then you have part 3, do the laundry. But I don't suggest looking at things as a really big, go clean that room. Instead, I suggest breaking down a minimum of 2. Most of my pediatric patients, I tell families break it into 4 steps. And make it obvious, so send them to step 1, go get everything off the floor. Step 2, now go ahead and get your sheets off and any dirty clothes in, bring it to laundry. Step 3, now families probably, since these are kids, if they're adults, they might be doing the laundry themselves. But now step 3, go ahead and vacuum and make sure that everything is put away correctly. Step 4, put your clean linens away, help us make your bed, now we're done. But now, instead of a headache of doing it all at once, and it seems laborious, we've now broken into meaningful chunks. And you can list those chunks and laminate them on the wall, so you have step-by-step schedules for how to do that, plus pictures for how it should look to do each step-by-step. Or, of course, you can take a digital camera and put it in the kids' room, or the adults, because this will work for adults too, and just have 4 pictures that step 1 is this, and put a little line down there so that they can read it. Know what they're supposed to do, they see what it's supposed to look like, so they have picture examples. Even works better, so now that they know what mom, dad, or guardian, or other roommates are expecting when they say this part of the project is done.
Right. Amy,
my kids love to check mark things.
Oh, yeah.
They love taking and checking stuff off, so I actually... dry erase markers actually work on picture frames. So, like, if you just keep the glass in it and you put the chores are back behind it, like I brushed my teeth this morning or whatever, then they check it off and they really like that. But yeah, to piggyback on what he said, myself, when I look at cleaning a room, it's very overwhelming for me. So the first thing I do is actually put on music, because I know that everything is way more fun when you have good music playing. And then I also know myself in that I love the instant gratification thing. So if I can, like, say there's a bunch of blankets in my living room, I will pick up the blankets first because I know that's going to make the biggest difference in what I see. And if I'm seeing that I'm getting stuff done, it's just going to keep the ball rolling. I'll be more likely to keep at it if I see a difference right away. And I actually have a friend who will take everything and put it in a pile first because she sees the results right away, and then she picks from that pile and puts it all away. I don't do that, but I can see why she does it. My hardest part is staying in the room once I've started. Like, for instance, you said, go get the vacuum. Well, I would go get the vacuum and get sidetracked by a banana in the kitchen. And then, I should probably start a little laundry so that can be going while I'm working on the vacuuming. And then 2 hours later, I realized that I never really made it back to the room that I originally started cleaning. So that for me is the biggest struggle, is just to make sure to stay in that room once you've decided to do it. But I like the 4 steps idea, especially for my kids. I'm going to use that. That's great.
Great. So epilepsy and its treatment can sometimes affect language, particularly word finding. That can be related to a medication like topiramate or Topamax can often cause that problem. It could be related to a specific epilepsy syndrome like Landau-Kleffner syndrome, or to a particular region of the brain that's affected. Can you talk about how speech-language therapists or pathologists can help, and what some day-to-day coping skills might be for people who struggle with language difficulties?
So speech and language pathologists, and this is where, Linda would have obviously responded a lot better than I might, but their job is to be able to help facilitate the more frequent use of areas of the brain that might be involved in either the epilepsy, the medications, or actually pathological damage. And so the brain works off this concept, and it's called the Hebbian rule. The more you use a particular area or a particular pathway, the stronger that pathway gets. So it's kind of like that use it or you lose it principle. So sometimes my patients that I work with will kind of say, I can't do that good anymore, so I just stop doing it. And if that's the case, you're only going to get worse at it. So if you're struggling with word finding or recalling people's names or knowing what you want to say, the rule of thumb is not to give up, but to practice it, particularly practicing it in non-stressful moments. Because it might be easier to look at pictures, get a picture book, a digital or Polaroid picture book, and rehearse those names and practice them like you're learning a memory game. For common people, whether it's your doctors, your nurses, family members, friends, ask to get pictures of them, and then study it so that the next time you go and you say, hey, I'm going to the mall with Sarah, Jane, and Billy Bob, because we all have friends named Billy Bob, of course, that you want to then look at those pictures and go, okay, here's the people I'm going with. So I see them now, I have familiarity with them, I've practiced it a couple times. In some cases, you might want to text yourself, so as you're coming to the mall, hey, I'm going with Sarah, Jane, and Billy Bob. So when you get there, you kind of have that familiarity. A speech pathologist will also teach you, one of the common things that I see them doing is don't panic. If you're trying to come up with that right word, or if you're trying to come up with that person's name, and you start to find yourself getting stressed and your mind starts to race, that will only make it worse to recall. Take a deep breath or step back and kind of go, okay, let me refocus, or just get used to asking. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names, and I know I've known you a while. What's your name again? And I know that sounds sheepish, but if those people really know you, they're not going to care. Sometimes if you can't do the full name at first, start thinking of what's the first letter of their name. So, oh yeah, that's J. J could be Jennifer, Jane, Jezebel. It's probably not Jezebel. That's uncommon. But your mind starts to roll through things, and then you can start to go, it's probably Jane. That sounds familiar. But by thinking of that first letter of their name, that can be useful. Or in some cases, you have good context memory. Where did you meet them? That's that church friend of mine. Oh yeah, shoot, and they sing in the choir. But now your mind starts to put them in a particular place and location, so that it can hopefully help you to draw back their name too. Another way, get used to over-greeting people. And as adults, again, we're uncomfortable with that. You know, when I see Russ, and I only see him, you know, maybe once a year, if even, at this point in time. But each time, you know, when I see him, it's like, hey, I'm going to go up and shake his hand and say, how you doing, Russ? Not that he doesn't know who I am and I don't know who he is, but that gives me now refamiliarity and primes my brain. So if I happen to, you know, cross him, you know, one time just randomly, I've now greeted him enough times and I know him enough times and it's like, oh, I got this. Whereas if you just say anything once and everything else is, hey, how you doing? You're more likely to forget. So overlook, how you doing, Sarah? Or how you doing, Jane? And re-say those names more frequently, even in conversation, can help to prompt names, but that can work for other things that you commonly say too. Similar strategy to help.
Right, great. Amy, you kind of mentioned this a little earlier, but anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, one thing that I found too is I love to read. I don't always make time for it, but I do find that I can usually recall my words better when I'm actively reading. And I don't know if it's just because you have words in front of you more often, or I don't know. It just, maybe it's like an exercise for your brain, but I do feel like that helps me call on words a lot easier when I'm actively and reading on a consistent basis.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't know if there's any scientific like anything that backs that up, but
yes,
it does work.
Absolutely. Reading actually primes the same language centers as talking does. And so the more that you read, even if you're not reading out loud and you're just reading in your mind, that primes word knowledge in your brain. So reading is an excellent strategy, Amy.
Great, great. So slowed processing speed is another common complaint among people with epilepsy. So in an increasingly fast-paced world, this can have a significant impact. So what are some compensatory strategies that can be used in school, in the workplace, or in social situations for people who maybe just it takes a little longer for them to process information or to come up with what they want to say or that type of thing?
Amy, you want to jump in?
Well, this, you know, again, it's so hard to come up with that word, and I do feel like this world is just getting faster and faster. So it is a situation that I find myself in very often, and a lot of times my hands just go up and I say, I don't know what my words are today. And sometimes they'll jump in there and help me. A lot of times someone will jump in there and help me because other people have days like that too. So that's one thing I've done. And again, back to the whole, you know, Google it. If you're not sure, Google it. All those things that I kind of lean on. Sometimes I'll turn to my husband and say, hey, do you remember that story about the blah, blah, blah? And he helps me fill in. It just depends on that social situation that I'm in.
Okay.
Sure. So the smarty side of me, just because I've shown you guys that, says just get a bear or a mountain lion and then get them behind you, and then you have to run. And that will get your processing speed faster, and you just have to run faster than the next epileptic person next to you, and you're going to be good. But that's probably not the healthy answer, so I didn't say that, okay, Russ? Right now, there is no scientifically proven way to improve cognitive processing speed. That said, there are absolutely things that we can do to help it. The first is always look at your day ahead. The more you set your brain up with that executor skill to know here's what my day has in it, here's where I need to be, when I need to be there, and you review that frequently throughout the day, so morning, lunch, late afternoon, or early evening, the more your brain's going to be primed to know the activities that it has to do. So we have to get used to that checking, rechecking, and going through it. The next thing is to always work, whether if you're at a job, work on a priority list with either your boss, coworker, or whatever project you need to get done. Set that priority list because that way if you get interrupted, you can tell them, hey, you can add that to my list, later today or tomorrow, but right now I have to. And the more you keep polarized on completing something before you move on to another task, keeping yourself in unimodal or working on one thing at a time rather than multitasking, which is something that Amy alluded to, the better you will be in getting things done faster. The third thing that I often tell families is set time expectations and limits. So if you're looking at this saying, hey, this should probably take me 15 minutes, set a timer. That timer can be motivational, say, I want to beat the clock. For some people that won't work because that'll either cause too much anxiety or they'll anticipate if they struggle with self-confidence, they'll anticipate, well, I'm not going to be able to do it anyhow, so what's the point? And we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot. But racing the clock can be very useful. It doesn't mean you sacrifice quality, but whether it's a work task, a house task, a family task, grocery shopping, this should reasonably take me X time. And now jobs are getting so structured. I hear hospitals in particular, where they'll say, I'm supposed to be doing 20 billing coding entries an hour. And if I don't meet that, then I'm below the average. So now they have an external goal set by their company or their employer, which can be useful. But remember, when we have epilepsy, stress makes us regress. And so we might not say, hey, I'm going to be a good 20 an hour billing coder for you. But I know that, I'm here. I know I do good quality work. Wondering if I could do mine at 20 an hour, but now I'm going to pay more attention to the quality of it and making sure I'm not making mistakes, so people are going to have to review me less frequently. But you can negotiate those. And so set your priority list, then set your time expectations for each. If you come up short and you don't finish something, I will often encourage individuals with epilepsy to have flex time in their day. For some people, that's a half an hour, but that's where you immediately go to your schedule and say, okay, I didn't get that done. Now I'm going to fill that into my open gap that I had, a half an hour from now or something, because I need to get this next thing so I don't get fired, or I need to get to that doctor's appointment because otherwise they're going to bill me a no-show fee and I won't get my medications updated. So still keep things in priority, but allow yourself a gap in a day to kind of catch up on some of the things you didn't get done earlier in the day. That can also take that stress off, and with stress, we typically can function so much better. And then the last thing I'm going to throw out there, and this sounds somewhat strange, and I will admit that, but there is some research now that the old analog games, Pac-Man, Space Invaders, Tron, Pong, Tetris, that those old games that allow your brain time to process the information. So it's not just reflexive hitting buttons like you do with Call of Duty or Mario, but when they let your brain plan, they start you slow. And as you get better at them and you go through the levels, they get faster and faster and faster. Those things may, in fact, show some benefit for improving cognitive processing speed. It's not scientific fact, but some early evidence over the last 2 to 3 years is showing that those old games might, in fact, help with cognitive processing speed.
That's great.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about some specific cognitive problems and specific strategies for dealing with those problems. Can you talk about some more general behaviors that can help with overall cognitive function, things like healthy sleep habits and exercise, or social interaction, environmental enrichment, things like that?
Yeah, Amy?
Sure. I'm definitely going to jump in on the sleep habit because that has been very, very important in my journey. If I don't get the right amount of sleep, everything else just goes to pot. It's just really, really hard for me to get through a day. I lose my language. I remember when I was raising my little ones when they were teeny and not sleeping a lot through the night. It was really hard for me to even think of words, for me to do pretty much anything. So I make sure that if for some reason I don't get the sleep that I need, that I make time in my day for that downtime at least. And sometimes I do take naps. I admit I'm 40 years old, and sometimes I need naps. Doing life is hard sometimes, and there are some interactions that just take a lot out of me. And so I know if I schedule in a nap that chances are pretty good I'm going to get a good grasp on everything again, emotionally and physically and everything else. So also you said exercise, Russ, that it does go by the wayside, especially when you're super busy, but I've noticed a direct connection of when I exercise, I somehow feel sharper. I feel less foggy, and like I can do and tackle things so much better. And stress management is a big one too. Stress is just a part of life, but if you have something good in your life that you can throw yourself into, I love to craft. It makes me happy. Sometimes it makes a huge mess, and then we have to do the whole cleaning up thing we talked about. But, have something in your life that you can just throw yourself into and de-stress. I wish that was gardening. I wish it was cleaning. But, and I have my photography, and that's great too. So self-advocacy, we are teaching that to Carter right now, early on, because I do believe that is going to be so important as he starts middle school this next year. It's a really scary time because there's a lot less interaction between the parents and the teachers. And so little by little, each time he moves up then to the junior high and then to the high school and then college, he will have to have the tools to advocate for himself. He won't always have me there fighting those battles for him. So I'm trying to teach him now how to be open about his story and how to ask for things and how to stand up for himself and speak openly about what it means to have epilepsy and asking for help, and that's okay. So,
Right.
that's my 2 cents.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm going to just throw in there, if this is appropriate with your medication formulary, I do tend to be one of those people who's a fan of omega-3. Sometimes that'll change the metabolization of medications, and so make sure you're talking to your prescribing physicians about what you have. A huge fan of what Amy said, the sleep, the exercise, and keep advocating for yourself. Those things are so imperative. I also so you guys have heard of the ketogenic diet, or I'm guessing most people on the phone here have heard of that. In some cases that can be useful, but we don't always need to go to the full ketogenic diet in order to reap some of the benefits just for general health. Most of us, especially in the young adult to older adult years, can benefit from a little bit of a protein snack throughout the day. It avoids the pitfalls and crashes that we experience with sugar highs, with too much sugar snacking and stuff like that. So protein can help to keep us stable over the day. So, nuts, some meats, some yogurts, cheeses, and stuff like that can help maintain our energy so we're not on so much of an up and down roller coaster. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals that I work with kind of get that all of a sudden ravenous appetite quickly, so they go grab whatever carbs they can find. Then they feel full for a while, but then, half an hour later, they're crashing, and so that up and down flow is not good. So healthy eating is important, but protein snacking is something that you might want to anticipate, and that could include a protein drink as well. For individuals on some of the medications that, one in particular that can cause some appetite suppression, you might want to have an Ensure or other nutrient-rich drink, even if it's a carnation meal in a bottle, to keep those nutrients going too, because you're going to need more of that. Remember, your brain's expelling a lot of ATP, adenyl triphosphate, in the process of epilepsy when it's not well managed, so you're burning more energy through the brain, and that uses 20% to 25% of the glucose for adults, for pediatrics up to 40% in learning intervals, so it's okay to have it just as long as it's in a healthy way that's not causing us to become overweight, obese, or putting ourselves at other health risk. When we talk exercise, I usually emphasize cardiovascular exercise, walking, jogging, treadmills, bikes, rowing machines and stuff like that, more than I emphasize getting a six-pack and pipes to look really good on the beach. I don't recommend that. Healthy sun time is important. Don't be out there sunbathing, and I'm not a fan of tanning booths. But getting enough sun, remember your skin with some medications might be more susceptible to sunburn. So put the suntan lotions on and put coverings on that you need, but sun can help build positivity, mood, as well as energy, and then help to improve the metabolization of vitamin D in our bodies, as well as B complex. So now that it's summertime in Michigan, great time to get out and do those types of things as well. And I think the last one that I'll just throw in there is, and this sounds so cheesy, but comfortable clothing. A lot of individuals with epilepsy, for some reason, struggle with the way that their pants feel, or their shirts feel, or they're bothered by different fabrics. It's a sensory deficit that can happen. And if you have to deal with trying to figure out if you're comfortable or not in what you're wearing, or the shoes and how your shoes fit when you're walking and stuff like that, your brain can't do nearly as much processing, because now it's focusing on dealing with comfort and not focusing on learning or paying attention to or remembering something. So be attentive to what you wear. It doesn't mean wear the same thing every day, but if you find things that you like, maybe buy a couple different colors in that something, so that you're very comfortable in the way that you feel as well.
Okay. So can I get a doctor's note for the yoga pants that I'm wearing every day? Because I'm pretty sure they're not in style anymore, but oh my God, I love it. I had no idea that could be something. I can tell you right now that my mom needs to listen in on this, because when I was in probably first grade, we got into huge battles because she wanted me to wear corduroys, and I could not stand wearing them. It just made me cringe to touch them. So I'm just going to chalk that one up to epilepsy, and not the fact that I was just being a brat and not wearing what she wanted me to wear.
Okay, well, great. We're gonna. We had a few more questions, but we're running out of time. I want to make sure we have some time for questions. Okay, does anyone have a question they'd like to ask?
I have a few questions, if possible.
Okay.
My name is Faith. Yes, and I was wondering if word searches and Sudoku and mind games like that are helpful for the brain, especially when it comes to memory and focus, helping memory and focus.
Absolutely, yes. So variety is the spice of life. So we don't want you to just do one activity. So if you became specialized in crossword puzzles, for example, that isn't necessarily sufficient in its own. But what you just mentioned was a variety of activities, and that answer is yes. Keep challenging your brain to do things, do the riddles and the Sudokus and the crossword puzzles and the word finds and the mazes. Really good activities to continually do.
Okay, great. And a couple more things. One, I have been on Dilantin for decades, and I'm wondering if that's a medication that may affect memory and focus.
Well,
sorry, what was that?
Just to jump in there, every anti-seizure medication has a potential for cognitive side effects. So the answer is yes, and particularly the older medications like Dilantin are more likely to have cognitive side effects than the newer ones. With the possible exception of Topamax, which tends to have a few more cognitive issues than some of the others. But certainly, you want to make sure that when you're considering what might be causing problems with your memory or other cognitive functions, the side effects from medications can certainly play a role, and it can be any anti-seizure medication can cause problems with that.
Okay.
I do want to...
And I had one more question.
Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
One of you mentioned that reading really helps you. That is that I can't read. I mean, my focus is so bad, and I'm not really sure what I can do about it. Amazingly enough, I graduated from college. I even got good grades, but I can't read. I just can't. My mind is somewhere else. I'm not sure what to do about it.
I'd like to jump in and answer that. I actually downloaded. I recently took a road trip by myself to Cleveland. It's like a 3-hour drive. And I really wanted to listen to a book, and I downloaded something called Audible. And there are books that you can download right to your phone on Audible and listen to it through your car, or even just through your phone or your headphones. And it reads the book to you. And it's so interesting that you don't even want to stop for, you don't want to stop the car because you're so interested in what, the book that you're quote-unquote reading. So I would maybe suggest trying that.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
I will too after that.
All right, so we got two.
Okay. At times I will try to speak, and the words will flow through my mind, of course, the words I'd like to speak, but my speech center is disconnected. I don't care how many words I can think of, I can't utter them, and won't. If I go home and take a nap, I'm fine. Is it lack of sleep for that?
That's a really good question. It's probably not lack of sleep per se. However, going home and taking the nap probably does restore some energy to the brain, probably gives you some more vitality, takes some of the stress off. What you're describing is either a stronger part of an expressive aphasia or possibly what's called anomic aphasia if it's just primarily word finding. It might be prudent for you to, it might be a good idea for you to seek out a speech pathology consultation, have them assess you, and see if they can't work with you to help make that less problematic.
Okay, thank you.
The other gentleman who had a question?
Yeah, this is Ryder Raymond.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And the question I had, I remember towards the very beginning of everything that over the years the seizures can cause worse and worse memory, which makes sense to me. I'm 46. I've had seizures since I was 5, so 41 years now. So obviously the memory's going pretty bad on that case, but what I'm getting to, I had a pretty massive seizure about 3 weeks ago, kind of a grand mal, but I was able to remember everything. I don't know how I would be able to remember everything on kind of a grand mal seizure. Has anybody else heard of anything like that?
So you remember what happened during the seizure?
Yeah, everything.
Okay. Yeah, that is not typically what happens with a grand mal or tonic-clonic seizure. That by definition there is a loss of consciousness. So it's possible you were having a different type of seizure that may have. There are focal motor seizures. So there are seizures that are that don't affect awareness. They're called focal aware seizures, and then there are motor versions of those seizures where you can have movement that may be similar to what you experience with a tonic-clonic or grand mal seizure, but it would not affect awareness. Typically, though, that type of movement would be different than what you would experience with a tonic-clonic. It wouldn't be the full body convulsions. It would be more of isolated movement in a hand or on the face or that type of thing, and it sometimes may spread, but that's a possibility. There's also the possibility of something called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, which can occur in people with epilepsy. Sometimes they have both epileptic seizures and psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, and that can those types of seizures can look and feel like an epileptic seizure, but in fact it is psychological in nature. It's often related to stress specifically. It's involuntary, just like an epileptic seizure, but the cause is different. And sometimes people who have what look like tonic-clonic seizures but have preserved consciousness, so they're fully aware through the seizure, sometimes that can be a non-epileptic seizure. But the only way you can really be sure to find out it would be to talk with your neurologist and then possibly have video EEG monitoring done, which is when you'd be hooked up to an EEG and also being videotaped, and that way they can see what's happening during that episode and see, okay, is there also that corresponding EEG abnormality during the episode that would confirm that in fact this is an epileptic seizure. But I
Right.
can talk with you more about that offline if you want. If you want to call tomorrow, I'm in the office tomorrow. But
I ended up staying at the hospital for 3.5 days after that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sure. Good question.
First of all, just very briefly, my daughter has many different kinds of seizures, and she's been organizing. We're talking about a lack of organizing. She's very strict about organizing herself all the time. Everything has to be in the exact position she wants it. But I have a question about tagging you spoke about. How do you find out about that? Because I've gone on the Internet and haven't been able to find things like that.
So when I've Googled those, I've just Googled GPS labels or GPS stickers, and there's popped up several ideas that have tags on them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much to our speakers. I really appreciate you joining us this evening and sharing your thoughts, and I hope this was helpful to everyone. I apologize we went a little over, didn't have as much time for Q&A, but if people do have questions after we're done with this call, certainly feel free to contact me, and I can always send an email to either Amy or Dr. Wolff to get their input if necessary, if it's beyond my capability. So thanks, everyone, and have a great weekend.